I am Dr. John L. Batty, and this is August the 6th, 1995, and I'm sitting here in Grand Lake in the cottage built by my father many years ago. Being probably the only remaining historical individual who knows something about this side of the lake, Steve wanted me to sort of give a resume of my experience and memories that have taken place over the past almost 81 years. Of course, my memory doesn't go back quite that far, but I'm going to begin reviewing the history of the cottage as I learned it from my uncle, Harry Stewart, with whom I lived after my father and mother died in 1919 and 1920. I have very few recollections of my parents, a few salient instances and events when we lived in New York. Most of my recollections deal with my association with Harry and Edna Stewart, who I revered as my own parents. It's interesting that why did my father and Mr. R.L. Keister, who lived in Alma in the early part of the 20th century, happen to acquire property here? The reason is because they had a friend by the name of G. Adams, who at one time had an interest or owned the bank in Alma, Nebraska. He had moved to Denver and went into the real estate business where he made a substantial fortune, and then on to San Antonio. And he was much older, I think, than my parents and Mr. Keister. And I do not know where he lived when this area was purchased by, this land was purchased by the Keisters and the Battys. I think he was probably living in San Antonio. Anyway, in going through some of my parents' papers quite a few years ago, we ran across the original deed to this particular property. J. Adams had big ambitions about this area, and he had it platted and started to build 2 roads up the mountain, as he had visions of building summer homes, vacation homes on up Shadow Mountain, which at that time was called Echo Mountain. And this became the Adams first edition. And my father, Dr. Earl Batty, and R.L. Keister, who owned the telephone company in Alma, acquired about 110 feet of property. My mother picked out this particular property because it was so symmetrically situated in the lake, near the center of the South Shore, with excellent views of Old Baldy, which eventually became Mount Craig. On the east, Mount Patterson on the north, symmetrically placed between the mountains on the north shore of the lake and the Rabbit Ear Range, as it was called then, to the northwest. They purchased this land, or this lot, for a sum of $350. I think that's very interesting because the appreciation of the value of this coastline or shoreline has been tremendous. And this, I think, was in about 1908, and the deed was registered in 1909. And the interesting part about this is that each family owned half of the other half. So mother and father owned half of Keister's side, and they owned half on my parents' side. Why in the world they did this, I have no idea. But I suppose they thought they were going to be friends forever and they would live forever. The complications of this will be discussed a little bit later. But the survey was laid out in what we call, or the surveyors call, meets and bounds. It goes from a point on a rock on the south shore, thence north, no, I guess it would be south to a point or a rock on what was called Jericho Road, thence east so many feet, and then back to another spot on the shoreline. Of course, those rocks are long since gone. And about the same time, the lot to the west of us was purchased by Charles Bruin, who was in the lumber business in Fort Morgan. And they subsequently would build a very fine cottage there shortly after this one was completed. I do not know exactly when this cottage was built, and we've been unable to find a record of it in Hot Sulphur Springs. They say that perhaps there are some records of it someplace in a bunker or a storage area in the library in Denver. But that hasn't been researched yet. Anyway, the lumber for this cottage was brought over on the ice and piled up here on the west of what is now the property. And then my grandfather, a man by the name of Lon Osborne, and some helpers came up in the spring to start building the cottage. This was all done by hand. They had no power tools, only their hands to do the work. They pitched a tent on the eastern portion of the eastern side of the lot, lived in that while they built the Keister's side. Then they moved into it and built this one. Now I think probably this was done in probably 1910. That's just a guess. But from some of the pictures that we've had, I can sort of figure that this might be right. I had my first birthday up here, and I look at my own experiences in raising children, and I marvel at my parents' ambition, dedication, and love of this place for all the work that they had to do. Because you see, I had a brother, Paul, who was just about 3 years older than I. So he was up here at the same time, so it was quite a deal. Now, I want to describe the cottage a bit as it was then. And of course, as I remember it when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. It's a far cry from what it is now. I think the original diameter, size of the house was, 25 by 25 feet? It was a story and a half. It was built of half logs, one side of which retained the bark. And these were mounted one on top of the other on a foundation that consisted of beams supported by pillars, which were also wood. There were trees probably 10 inches in diameter. And these were placed on rocks, which were sitting right on the ground. there's some of the old tools. There were some of the old tools left that I found that I didn't find the level, and from the looks of the cottage, I think they probably built the cottage by, I'm getting their level by eye. The beam on the south side of the cottage was actually resting on rocks, but on the ground, and it's still there. The house had a kitchen, dining room, a nice living room. The upstairs was quite acceptable. The vertical walls upstairs were only about 3 feet high, and went up to the gable. The walls in the first floor were covered with building paper, and then there was a rather refined type of burlap that covered the walls. It was a darker brown below and a tan above, but it seemed quite appropriate in this. And the junction of these two types of burlap was covered by pine, a small, probably lodgepole pine that had been skinned. The beams of the house were as they are now, as you can see in the photographs. The stairs that went up were very becoming. But now let me describe the kitchen. It was rather small. It had a cook stove, a regular coal range. Of course, we just burned wood. It had one table. The left side of the east side of the kitchen had some cupboards in it with doors that closed. On the west side was just open shelves. There was a large window looking out up the mountain, and I would say that area was probably 8 by 10 inches in size. The walls were not finished. The lumber was old dimension 2x4s that had never been planed. The walls were about 1 by 12. On the south side, on the north side of the kitchen, on the other side it was just the bare wood. On the north side of the kitchen was a small bench, and there we had our wash basins where we washed, where the men who could do that had shaved, and then we opened the back door and threw the water down the mountain. There was a small porch there, which was very appropriate. I would say it was about 6 by 10. And on that we had the water bucket, the spring water that was procured morning and evening. And just to the left of the door there was our refrigerator. Now, the refrigerator was just really a cooler, a screened-in box that had 2 shelves in it. And this is where we kept our food. We could keep fish out there for 2 days. We have lettuce and cream and milk, and all perishables were kept out there. And this was probably possible because the area was well shaded with rather good-sized pine trees at that time. On the south side of the house was there hung a couple of big what do you call them? Tubs, galvanized tubs. And it was in these tubs that we did the washing on a washboard, and took baths. We took a bath in the kitchen, which had a wood floor. And then we would heat the water on the cook stove, take a bath. I don't know how the women got along with it, but I couldn't ever sit down with the thing. And we'd rinse off and throw the water out the back door and downhill. See, I digressed there more than I should. I should have finished describing the house. Anyway, to the east of the kitchen was the dining room. And this was a fair-sized room, and it was about the size of our present kitchen and the little head that's on the east side of it. We had a nice dining room table with good chairs. There was a plate railing at about 6 feet, and where plates were kept, decorated of course. And I remember pinned to the wall were pictures of the Gibson girl, who was really the popular illustrators, models of the time, particularly for Cottages and Saturday Evening Post. And I'm sorry that those were destroyed when we renovated it and the whole house in fact. There were two doors, one going into the kitchen and one going into the dining room. Now underneath the stairs there was a locker where we kept everything. And above that we had was a little two level drawers, cupboards, and a nice drawer where the linens were kept. And that's what it was. That's all there was. We kept our tools, fishing equipment, most everything in that locker underneath the stairs. The living room is essentially as it is now, except that, of course, the windows that now we see are big plate glass. There were 8 individual windows that were set up in frames that, as ordinary windows are, that have small panes. And these weren't very tight. The fireplace, of course, was as it is now. I might mention that the fireplaces were built by Long Osborne. The one on the Keister side was built first, and then he built ours, of course, later. Both of which have stood the ravages of time. They really haven't moved appreciably. The house has moved around them, but they're still stable, and they were so well built that they really never changed. And they're just exactly as they are. Now I'll stand up so you can see the fireplace. I'll move the chair here. And above the fireplace, you see this clock. And I think that clock has been there as long as I have. The story of that is that it was awarded to my grandfather as a prize for getting subscriptions to the World Herald. And the interesting thing is that I have seen 2 other clocks like that. One in York, and I don't remember where the other one was. But that's a historical piece of equipment, and it's been keeping time now for, I'm sure, 80 years. And I hope that we'll keep doing this for another long period of time. To the left of, or south of the fireplace was a large wood box in which we kept wood for the fireplace. Those boxes are still down below. And alongside the box was the swing, which now is on the front porch. I can remember Dorothy and I swinging in this, bumping into the wood box, being told by Harriet, don't do that, not to hit the wall behind. And, of course, we did as they asked us to do. The furniture, the chair in which I am now sitting, was part of the original furniture here. This is hickory that was made in someplace in Indiana, and I believe it is still being constructed. And the corner over here was a sort of a day bed, which opened out to a full bed. And then the table sat here, and this table now sits on the front porch. And over it was a hanging kerosene lamp, which now hangs here. It was electrified when electricity was put in. And Steve has done a beautiful job of taking care of it. This was our main original lamp, and we had regular kerosene lamps that we carried around the house, and we were always so careful that so they wouldn't catch fire. The cottage faced north, and we have a long porch that it's about, I'd say, maybe 6 or 7 feet wide, that extends all along the north shore, on the north side of the house. And then the drop off immediately into the lake. Below the house is where we stored our wood, our boats. The original boat was the Mary Ann, old galvanized iron boat that was probably 18 feet long. We used 2 sets of oars to propel it. It was named for my mother. And Dorothy and I could take that boat across the lake in 12 minutes. We got pretty good at it. The water for our cooking and drinking came from the spring, which was about probably 200 yards west of here along Jericho Road. But the water for washing came from the lake. At that time, the lake water was as clear as could be. There were no particles in it, and one could see probably 20, 25 feet down if the sun was shining a lot. My duties: keep the wood box full, bring in the chips for the fire in the morning, bring up the water from the lake, and twice a day get fresh water in the spring. And that was always a nice experience. I enjoyed it, and I never objected to either of these things. To walk along the lake, to walk along Jericho Road was always pleasant. You always saw something new. And there was a big tree up there that leans toward the north. I always felt that, by golly, someday that's going to fall on my house. It didn't. The tree is still there. Oh, I forgot to mention the plumbing that we had. We didn't have any. All the wastewater was thrown out the kitchen door, over the railing, and down south of the fireplace. There. The latrine was went out the back door and up what Mother used to call the golden stairs. Dad had constructed stone steps there, and it was a two-holder, fairly comfortable as I recall, and it was of just flat boards, shed roof, but it was nicely concealed or camouflaged by a ring of vertical poles, probably 10 feet long, on four sides with a little opening where one could get in. And I often wanted to dug that, but that is where we made our physiological deposits and where the garbage went. We had what we called slop jars, and the refuse from the cooking, potato peelings and all that sort of thing, went into those. And that was another one of my jobs, carry them up there and dump them in the middle of the tree. Now let's see, where do we go from here? The interesting too that when we would come up to Grand Lake, we would leave. Whoops. Well, hold on. Shh. Shh. Doc. Okay. He's cutting conversation with other dogs that are barking now. Anyway, the Keisters were rather ambitious people, and their children were older than I, and they would cut down lumber up above and cut it up and use that for their wood, but we would have the wood brought across the lake, thrown on the dock, and we would carry it into the house, and then I would chop it. How did we get to Grand Lake? We came up by train. We got on old number 3 at about midnight, arrived at Denver probably around 7 o'clock. We'd have breakfast, get on the Moffett Road, the train, it was called the Denver and Salt Lake. And of course we always had lunches along with us because that was cheaper than eating in the diner. At 8 o'clock we would take off on the Moffett Road up to Tolan, then up over the hill to Corona, going around Yankee Doodle Lake. I remember we could look down and see this lake on 3 occasions. Then we'd stop at Corona, get off, and this was well above timberline. I think it was, as I recall, 10,760 feet or 960 feet above sea level. And it was a small city under snow shed, in the snow shed. Everything was enclosed because the trains ran all there. There were several tunnels on the way up. Then we would start down, and we went a little faster. We would arrive at Granby about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then there would be buses from the Rocky Mountain National Transportation Company there to bring us to Grand Lake, who would take us down to the dock, where Captain McCarthy had 3 boats, the Hazel, the Bertha, and Lulu, the first motorboats on Grand Lake. And we would load our trunk, sometimes a case of eggs. Then we brought up rugs for the house, and everything we need to clothes, because we would expect to stay here a month or more. Harry usually coming up for 2 weeks during this vacation period. We had a great time. Dorothy and I with Edna. Upstairs we had 2 bedrooms. One where the large bedroom is now, and one to the east of that. The walls upstairs were just the bare logs, and of course they were caulked with oakum, which was brown, and it came through. You could look up and see the sheeting on the roof that formed the roof, and the shingles, and you could see air, quite some light coming through. But it was interesting very seldom did that leak. And this was just, remember, this is just a story and a half. Our beds, well, the major bed was handmade by my grandfather, I'm sure, made out of pine logs. The mattress was filled with straw. Blankets were tremendous. I can remember them so heavy because it was cold, and the only heat here was the fireplace and the stove. And it would really get cool later in August because I can remember ice on the water in the drinking bucket sometime in the morning. There was a locker upstairs which had an accumulation of many things: bedding, pillows, clothes. Of course, I remember this from a later time. Want me to take off my glasses? Many things of which we threw out or burned. And Steve is particularly sad about that. But we had so much stuff around here that we just couldn't keep it. We didn't have any rugs upstairs. It was just a bare floor. We didn't have any carpet down here. Below, we had some beautiful Navajo rugs that we brought up here. We brought 3 of them each year. And for the life of me, I don't know what became of those, because they were heavy and they would be extraordinarily valuable. But what became of them, I don't know. You got a red one, a gray one, and a black and white one. And even we used those at home. But anyway, that's getting away from the story. We also slept under mosquito netting, because when we go up here in July, the mosquitoes were in abundance, and the screens weren't adequate, and the place was filled with mosquitoes. And but we managed. But about the 1st of August, the mosquitoes would they would disappear, and life would be fine. Where did we keep the boat? Well, we had a dock down here on the west side of the lot, and it was quite serviceable. Had a railing around it. We had a step down, and we kept the boat. The old Mary Ann parked, or tied up alongside. Keisters also had a dock. But let me tell you about the Keisters. Mr. and Mrs. Keister, Aunt Nora and Riley were 2 of the finest people I have ever met. He, as I mentioned before, had the telephone company in Alma. They lived in a big old mansion that I didn't know until, of course, later. And they had no children. Well, the parents of 3 children died suddenly in Alma, and they adopted these 3 children. It was Opal, the elder, Mildred, a beautiful girl with long red hair, and then the younger brother was named Carl. Carl was probably 3 or 4 years older than I. But we all were up here together, and we had a wonderful time. This is some of the nice period of my life. This is probably one of the nicest periods of my life. And there was always something to do. We were catching chipmunks, chopping wood, there was work to do. We'd fish from the dock. The water in those days was extraordinarily clear, as I mentioned before. And about 10 o'clock each morning, the suckers would swim counterclockwise around this lake. And they'd come in schools of probably 5, 10, 15, just slowly swimming. They weren't feeding. As a rule, they just swim around the lake. Now, they're a different sucker than we have now. They were yellow, almost orange on the ventral portion, and they were real dark above. And I think it was called the black sucker. And what we would do, when we get a gang hook, it had 3 hooks on it, and the whole thing would, set of hooks would be about that wide, and then we had bamboo poles, and we cast out there and try to get that thing underneath the sucker, and we pull it out, you see. We try to hook them in the head, because then we would fight. If we hooked them in the abdomen, they didn't fight so much. So then we bring them out, stick a knife in their swim bladder, and throw them back out so they would sink. And we could take those suckers either from our dock or Bruins or Keisters. So we had 3 shots at them. Once in a while we'd find some going along feeding. Then we'd have a light rod, a trout rod. We'd put some little bait on it, put it on the bottom, and they'd come along, take it in, and then we'd have fun. Because these suckers were probably 18 inches long, and I would say weighed 3 pounds. And they'd give us a pretty good tussle for a few minutes, then they gave up, and we'd do the same thing. Another use for those suckers was that they would use as bait, and we'd cut them up, put them in an old tobacco tin, and then Harry and Mr. Keister take those and drop the yeast in it and use it for bait in turbulent water. Now let's see. I should mention the Bruin place next door. Now, I didn't ever know the Bruins. I think something happened to them. Well, maybe I knew Mr. Bruin. They built probably within 5 feet of the lot line. Maybe a little closer. Mother had wanted to put the latrine out on the lot line, just directly west of the back door. We started to build. So that's the reason the latrine was put up the hill, because he built so close to the door. My Uncle Harry he was a little vindictive about it, and he told her, you should have put it over the same right there at the back door anyway. But Mother was a lady. Bruins built a big house. Really, really big, with a large screened-in porch and a huge area underneath. Big stairs, big bedrooms upstairs. And they had a bathroom. The reason they had a bathroom was because Keister's dad and Bruin got together and they put up on the back of our lot here at least a 3,000 gallon tank. Bigger. It was big. And down right on the lot line, just to the left of that, on Bruin's property, was a big chunk of concrete, and on that he had a pump, an old gasoline pump. They would pump water up to this tank, and then Bruins would run down into their bathroom. For some reason or other, Dad and the Keisters didn't ever hook onto that. Why, I don't know. But it was kind of a pain in the neck, because seldom would the engine work, and when it did, the pipe sometimes been full and it had frozen and water would run out of it, and they had it bound with rags, and it really wasn't a very efficient operation. But Bruin also had a boathouse. It was very big, but in it he had a really unique motorboat. It had a one-lung motor, or one-cylinder motor. You started with a flywheel in it, and you'd start it with just turning the flywheel. But it was very unique. It was built by a fellow by the name of Ives, who lived across the lake. A rather peculiar fellow, but he built good boats, and he built them for several individuals around.
and they would be worth thousands of dollars if they were available now. This had a, it was almost just a, it was just a long bow with a small cockpit. In the center of this cockpit was this one engine, and I can still remember Mr. Bruin out there trying to get that thing started. And once in a while, he would get it to going, and he would go out around, and then he'd come back, and it would fail, and we'd have to go out and get him and bring him back in. He had two children, Charles and I think Margaret. But Bruins died when I was just a child, and after that, the family seldom if ever came up, and the cottage was rented. And I'll tell about that a little bit later. They had regatta week in those days. There were 3 or 4 sailboats, maybe 5 on the lake. I'd look at them with envy. I can remember the Margarita and the Hijacker and the Dorothy, and maybe there were a couple of more. That's all that I can remember. They were, the Margarita was a gaff-rigged boat, and the other, so was the Dorothy, but the Hijacker was a cat rig, not a cat rig, but it was a Marconi rigging. It had a jib, and they had these races, and Dorothy and I would watch them with a great deal of interest. And this is the way things went until I got a little bit older, and then when I was late in high school, I used to come up here by myself. I had a pass because of my uncle working for the railroad. And I'd come up and follow the same routine. And I was big enough then to really do some strenuous work. The old dock was falling apart, and I got up on the hill above it and cut down the trees and logs, staked them down here. This was green stuff, and it was heavy. And bought the lumber and rebuilt the dock. Of course, burnt the old one in the fireplace, which was our only means of heat. And that continued, so I went to medical school. Dorothy, grown up by that time, gone to New York, where she got her master's degree from the Columbia University. But I didn't tell you about what Harry and I did. We fished. We'd get into the old Mary Ann, go down to the east end of the lake where there were no cottages, except there were a couple on the north side of the east end, and then the old Adams cottage. The J. Adams built in the southeast corner. We had our boots, the rod, the creels, up we'd go. But before that, before I was old enough to fish, I used to go along with Harry. And I'd follow along the bank. And then he'd carry me across the creek. And then it was my job when I got home to clean the fish. But we fished the East Inlet, the North Inlet. We went up to Lone Pine, Verna. Went up to Spear Lake above that. The fishing was always excellent. And then a group of us would also go up the North Inlet, go up to the Cascades. We'd go over to Ives, which is directly across the lake. We were our boats there. Go up over the hill. There was a big park up there. We'd go over across that. There was an old trail that went up to the south side of the North Inlet until we got to the top of the Cascades. Then we could cross and go above. But there was some beautiful berry patches just on the south side of the stream. right at the Cascades. And we would go up there and we'd pick gallons of it, but you had to hit them right. And they were in the rocks up the mountain, and you'd pick up this the branch of the tree, and you could pick a handful of luscious raspberries. Then you'd bring them home and make pie, and jelly, and jam. Mr. Keister had a secret place that he'd go. He wouldn't tell anybody about it. He wouldn't tell anybody. There was some place above there. He and Carl would know about it. And they'd come down and they'd have a 2-gallon bucket full of raspberries. They'd never tell Harry and me where to go. I guess that's a prerogative of berry pickers. You find a patch, you don't tell anyone. But this patch was up there all my youth. Now, whether they're still there or not, I don't know. I doubt there's even a trail up there. You have to go across up to the top of the Cascades, cross over, and then come back south. Lovely country. And then we'd also go pick blueberries. They came a little bit later. There was a place up on Shadow Mountain called Cornstalk. It's the far east end. That had burned over many, many years ago. And there were lots of blueberries up there. And on the trail up there, there were places where they'd had snow slides. And they'd just taken the timber off, and that's where the blueberries were too. There were a few places up at the East Inlet where there were lots of blueberries. But over the years, they stopped growing. There was a place up there called Camp Florence, just below the junction of the Hell Creek and the East Inlet that comes out of Lone Pine. There were lots of blueberries there, and I can remember on one occasion, Dorothy and I were coming down, and Dorothy was ahead of me, and she said, "Look, John, there's a bear!" And there was a bear coming into the other end of it. The bear turned around and ran, and we laughed more than that. Anyway, we had great times. Because all of us here, Feasters and us, we would go berry picking. And Harry, Mr. Keister would fish, and the kids would pick the berries. Well, of course, when I got big enough to fish, I did that too. And Harry and I had great times going up the East Inlet, and then the North Inlet too, above the Cascades. And there's some big holes up there, just huge. You'd fish those with bait. And that's what we used the sucker for, you see. And I can remember Mr. Keister kept hooked it on to one in there so big that he could not move it. It moved around, pretty soon, bing. But that caught there was some big fish in that. But up the East End of it is where it was so much fun. And I got to thinking, maybe that was my own particular private fishing area. I didn't like, when I go fishing, I didn't like to see anybody else up there. Usually we'd go above the second meadows and start there and fish up the canyon to a third meadow. Or if we were ambitious, we would go on up past Camp Florence, take a left hand, and go up to Lone Pine, Verna, and Spirit Lake. When we go up to Verna, you can see the fish out in the water. You probably remember it, Steve, don't you? Or up in Spirit Lake, you can see those fish out there, and then you just stalk them. Throw out your fly, and then you... But if we didn't catch enough, we'd come back to Lone Pine, wait out, just to see where the inlet is, you catch all the fish you want. And sometimes they'd be so large that we'd have to wade into shore to take them up our hook. Then we'd come back with a creel full of fish. Because that was our major food, really. That was our major meat. Then one time we heard about this Hell Creek, so we went up there. That was quite a climb. And there's some meadows up above that had thousands of fish in, just thousands. And these were all natives. Now, a native is a little different from the brook. The brook, the rainbow, he's up at the head of the pool. The native sits down at the lower end of the pool. You drop your fly down, and they don't hit it like a rainbow or a brook trout. He'll just go up and the native just goes up and takes a hold of it. So sometimes you would be a little anxious. And then there's a couple of big meadows up there. And you could see the trout out in this meadow, in the little areas. And we would do the same thing, cast out there and those fish. And they would run 20 or 30 feet. They'd see that. It was amazing. And I learned so much about trout fishing there. Then up above, way on above there, was a place called Lake Adams. Let me tell you about that. That was a terrific experience. I was over in a drugstore one day. This was probably when I was 19 years old. And ran into Lon Osborne again, the fellow that had helped build the cottage and built the fireplaces. And he was telling me about the lake that he had stocked years before, Lake Adams. He told me where it was. They put their 2 cans, cream cans, with young trout, took them up this trail that went up to Cornstalk, way back yonder, and then over down in, around Mount Adams, and then down into Lake Adams. Is there any fish in there? He said, no. He said, I don't know, but I understand once in a while somebody goes up there. Now, he said Lemoyne Porter has been up there. Now, Lemoyne Porter was the son of Mr. Porter, of course. They were also from Alma, and they built a cottage up, it's supposed to be almost a half a mile west of here, along the lake shore. So Harry and I said, well, let's go. So we left here one morning with blankets, frying pan, a little bit of some bacon. I don't know what other food we had, but we started up there. Well, we got to the top of the trail, which came out right where the landslide is above the east end of the lake. That's where the trail ended. So we said, just follow that, go out southeast, and till you get to Mount Adams, and then you climb up over it and drop down. So we walked, and we walked, and we walked. Beautiful country. There was virgin timber up there. I think there were trees that were 3 feet in diameter. Little pond. We even saw a wood duck on one of them. We finally got up to the past timberline. Harry said, I'm through. He said, I'm not going any further. Gonna have to go back. We'll go down here in this little meadow and we'll stay all night and then we'll go back down. Well, of course, he was 56 at the time. And I said, well, you wait here. I'll go up to the divide here and see what I can find. So I did. And I was within hailing distance, and when I got up there was Lake Adams. So he revived, and we got to the top. Now, there was a big snowbank here. I said, Harry, let's just sit down and we'll slide down that snowbank. He said, no way. And here was a rock slide over here. So we sat down, and we slid all the way down to the lake. Just on our heels and our after ends. But oh, what fishing. There were a few trees around it, so we prepared for the night. We cut down some branches like all Boy Scouts are supposed to do, you know. And you make your bed, we spread out the blanket, and went fishing. we catch two fish at a cast. So we didn't want to do that, so we tip off one of the flies, you see. So we caught enough fish for supper. Had the campfire, doing fine. It was nice and warm. And we went to sleep. And warm air was coming up the valley. And then about 2 o'clock, the wind changed, and the heavier air from above came down the canyon, and we froze until dawn. So we got up and went fishing, and I caught a fish that was so long, the tail came out one side of my jacket, and the head came out the other. I said, I'm going to have to take this back. And I did. I brought it back. But we didn't come back the way we came. We dropped down into Hell Creek, Paradise Park, down to the East Inlet. And the worst part of it was walking from the beach home, because we hadn't taken the boat there. And I have never been so tired in my life. And I can recall that vividly. And someplace there's a picture of me holding that monstrous fish. I looked like I'd come out of the jungle. And it must have been about 6 or 6:30 when we got home. What a wonderful experience. Steve, many years later, one of his friends, tried to find that lake. But I think he didn't, because there were no fish in it. He found a lake up there. There are 2 of them up there. One of them had fish in it, Lake Adams, the other one didn't. And the outlet joined to come into Hell Creek. And I think he took when he went up there to try to find it, he took the wrong stream and followed to the wrong lake. But those were such good times. Well, anyway, I went to medical school and would come up here and had fun. Used to dance at the Pine Cone Inn. Met a girl over there. I don't remember her name, but she used to come over here and we'd cook and have dinner. And I took her up to Cornstalk one time, and we had a Davenport, or this daybed was here. And of course, I made a pass at her, but she says absolutely no. So that was my first. Now, I was the age then when we thought about those things. But we had a good time. We went to some plays. And I never heard from her. But next door, let's go back a few years. There was a Mr. and Mrs. Gibberly that rented the ruined place. Mr. Gimperline was a colonel in the Army, the regular Army, and Mrs. Gimperline, his wife, was a rich woman from Virginia. And she liked me, and we got along fine. She and I used to go fishing together. And she used to sort of try to give me some education and training, influence one thing or another. I can remember saying, John, be a snob. Be a snob. You will get further. Her money came from a hardware company in Denver, the Tritch. And they had a daughter, Gretchen. And of course, I don't know what happened to the Tritches anyway. She wound up as the colonel's wife, and he was attaché at Cuba at that time. But anyway, I had a lot of fun. I'd go rowing, and we'd fish with a little Colorado spinner. Of course, you take it real slowly. Look around and those fish would hit it, and we catch all the fish we wanted right here in the lake. And they'd be, 12, 14 inches long. And we had great fun doing that. And we became great friends. But later, they rented the cottage to a couple that had 2 children. one girl about my age and a younger boy. And Gretchen Tritch had a sailboat. So I don't know where it came from, but we rigged it up, and I learned to sail on that boat. I had no instruction whatsoever. We just got out and sailed. It was a cat rig. We didn't ever turn over, but I got my first taste of sailing for that, and that conditioned me, I think, for my later sailing experiences. The younger brother wanted to go on a hike. Well, Mr. Keister told me about Love Lake, which is up the East Inlet. No, the North Inlet. He said, I said, how do you find it? Well, he said, you go up to the Cascades, and there's the first valley up to the south. Follow that up, so there's Love Lake. So I had been over at the Pinecone Inn the night before with Gimperlings. They built the old house that Jack built east of us, rebuilt it, with their hired man. We went over there and danced with the girls. We drank a little bit more than we should. Now I think I was 20 at that time, maybe 21. I was legal. Well, I remember I got sick. I got sick. So sick that I vomited. I got up the next morning, and I felt terrible. Gosh. I think it was the second hangover I'd ever had. But I promised him I'd take him, so we rode across the lake, went up the North Inlet, climbed up, and that damn Love Lake was way up here. You almost had to go up on your hands and knees to get into that, but we found it. Of course, there weren't any fish on it. But I made it, but I learned my lesson again. I learned my lesson. That was my first visit to Love Lake area, and I went up there once later, caught a few fish. And one of the interesting things about that, there's on the south side of the lake, maybe it was the east. You could climb up there, the ridge, and there was Lake Nakunai down on the other side, which is a beautiful lake. So I was up there about, Harry was someplace else, so I said, well, I'm going up yonder. So I dropped down to Lake Nakunai. I wasn't going back up there. So I went out, took the trail on down. They didn't know where in the hell I was. But, and it was, the trail, it's a long ways from Lake Nakunai down to the trail, because you had to go way north, make a big circle, and come back in. So I finally think they gave up, but I finally caught up with them on the way down. That was my last visit to. No, you and I went up there, didn't we, one time? And your line broke or your reel?
Yep. I went over to Kona just like you did.
Is that right?
The fishing was better, and then there is a spinning reel.
Yes, that's right.
So I went on around the way you did, and you and I was thinking there was Etheridge or somebody, or Jimmy Morrison, I don't remember. And I think you guys went back. I can't remember exactly. But it reminded me so much of what you were saying there, is that I looked over and here's this beautiful lake. I bet there are fish in it.
Anyway, it was great. Those are some of the experiences we had. After my fishing experiences are short to minutes here. As I said before, that was our main source of meat, so we had to go fishing every third day. We didn't have very much money. We weren't the summer vacation type people up here. We were just fortunate to have this place. And, I would fish with Harry and Carl, and Mr. Keister particularly. As you know, my parents died when I was 5 years old, and Paul and I were separated. So Paul didn't get to share this experience with me. He grew up in boarding schools back with my aunt, Aunt Mary, Harry's sister, in Western Springs. So he didn't have the opportunity to live in a family as I did. And I think that shaped my life very much. But one thing Harry would say to me when we were going fishing, and here was a good hole, and he'd say, let Mr. Keister go up there. Let him fish it first. He's older, and he's as agile as you and I are. Let him do it first. Or if you're taking the guest fishing, let him have the best holes. And then, that was nice. And those are things that you learn that you know, and that's the way you should treat them. Anyway, let me tell you about going up to Hell Creek. Now that's the stream on the south side of Baldy. And that's a tough climb. And the water just goes. Harry and I, Mr. Keister went up there first time. And fishing was good. But Mr. Keister, there's a meadow up above there. So we were going along and fishing, and I saw this little canyon taken across up there. Right up, to me, would have been southeast. So I'll bet I can reach that meadow without having going way out around. So I took off with my rod up there, and pretty soon came out a little flat place. I remember this big rock out here, and here was this lovely meadow. You can see where it canyoned up. So I went down to the outlet of that canyon. And I was just sort of doping around, waiting for Harry and Mr. Keister to come up. Now, Mr. Keister, in spite of all the mountain climbing he didn't like high places. And there was one place, I remember, where the creek went through between two rocks. Now, this was high, maybe 15 or 20 feet up. And we had to go across. And he wouldn't do it. I was amazed. So I got on one side, and Harry faced me, and we passed Mr. Keister between us across that. And I was never able to find that place again. Maybe I just didn't find out because the fishing was so good. And that meadow up there had thousands of fish in it. Thousands. I mean, you look up in one of these holes and it would be gray with native trout. Well, we got so we wouldn't keep them unless they were under 10 inches, over 10 or 12 inches long. And we'd fill our creel and down and great fishing. It's just wonderful to look back and have the memories of this. And this is one thing that bothers me. Here I have two grandchildren. They don't fish, they don't hike. All I want to do is, one of them or two of them, they'll sail. But they like boats, girls. They didn't ever commune with nature as I learned it. Well, of course, it's meant so much to me, and I think they've missed a lot. I used to like to climb the mountains. One time, I went up, this is when I was here alone, I went up to Mount Cairns. Mount Cairns is this sharp-looking area that comes out from the north side. But when you get up below it, it's fissured. There are big canyons or passages that go in between these rocks. So I said, well, I'm going to go up there. And I did. We'd go clear up on top. Then you'd come back down around, down for this major spring run across the east end. Did you ever do that, Steve?
In fact, I had videos of it.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. How much you can see up there. One place I didn't ever get, though, was Lake Bonita. Harry and Mr. Keister went up there one time. Stayed overnight. Now, Lake Bonita is above Lake Nikolai, which I mentioned earlier. Then they climbed out over the divide, dropped down into either Verna or Lone Pine. Came on that. It rained on them most all the time. But I remember they came back with native trout, which were probably 15 inches long. That's the only trout that's in that lake. It was magnificent, but I never got up there, and I never got to the top of the bowl. Climbed Shadow Mountain, got up to the ranger's cabin one time. Vernon Maynard came up with me, and in early spring, always after schools, I would be in June. We went up there. But I enjoyed that area. Now let's see, where do you want to go?
Talk about how you got to medical school.
Oh, I got to medical school. Well, I don't know, for some reason or other, I was always interested in biology. And even when I was in the 9th grade, I decided I wanted to do medicine. But then, maybe it's because I learned to sail up here at Grand Lake. I don't know. But I decided I wanted to go to the Navy. Well, that was the time when George Norris was running for re-election. He was from Cook. Harry knew Mr. Norris, so I went down to see him, and he said, yeah, I'll take care of it for you.
Yeah, it was Senator, right?
Yeah, he was Senator Norris. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I didn't ever hear from him. So I went down to, time for take the examination, and I went down to the post office, and they said, we don't have your papers. And this was my second semester, at the time of the second semester of my second year in college. That was gone. So I went back, said, well, I'll have to be a physician. So I went back, talked to them what I need. And they gave me a special course in, I think, biology and comparative anatomy, so I could be qualified to get into medical school. So I applied for medical school and was accepted. And this is the reason I did it. Maybe I didn't know very much about mathematics, but I changed my mind soon enough so that my first semester of my sophomore year, I took college algebra. I got the lowest grade in that I ever got in anything, because I'd had no background in that except 9th grade algebra and plain geometry. Anyway, that's the reason why I'm in this profession. Well, after the war, or during the war, Harry and Edna used to come up here. And they started to build this complex of Shadow Mountain, Granby Reservoir, and they built this tunnel, the Alva Adams tunnel over to Grand Lake, to take the water out of the Colorado River through Shadow Mountain Lake, runs into Grand Lake, over to Estes Park, and down into the fields of the reservoirs, Horsetooth or reservoirs, both Fort Morgan or Fort Collins, and so that's unique because in Nebraska at that time it was illegal to take water out of its watershed. In Colorado, you could, and that's the reason a lot of this water winds up in eastern Colorado and probably some going down into Nebraska. I'm not sure. Anyway. Most everybody around here was opposed to that, but it's turned out to be a blessing, because the water level at Grand Lake stays constant. It doesn't vary more than, say, 6 inches. In the olden days, before this, when all the water went west, the lake level would fluctuate about 2 feet during during the year, you see. And because of that, when we clean our fish, we could sit down on the rocks that are now covered with water. Oh, and about all those, we clean thousands of fish. We throw the viscera out, and under the rocks would come these little minnows. The next morning, it was all gone. And we wanted particularly good bait. We have a little trap made out of wire with indentations in both sides. We put it down there, put some viscera inside, and put it out, and the next morning we'd have live minnow bait. So we chop those up and use that for bait. We fished big holes with bait, try to get the big fish, but we always used flies for bait.
How about the story of you and Harry went up and you saw this big fish, and you said, "We'll catch it on the way back down." Remember that one?
Oh yeah. This would have been probably on Lake Vernon, and it was when you could do that, you sort of stalk the fish, go up behind and then throw the cast out ahead of him, because up in that area, if there wasn't any breeze, that water which is as clear as the air, had no ripple. They could see you. And you just cast down and you could see them coming. One time Dorothy brought her boyfriend, Bob Little, out here. We went up there, the three of us. Bob had never fished before. We fished on up and where's Bob? So I went back. I had left him fishing under a tree. He knew there was a fish out there. And he spent their mission trying to catch that fish that knew he was there. Bob was a great fella. He had his PhD in chemistry. And they were eventually married. Bob's still alive. Well, then came the war years, my medical school, and residency in Chicago. And when I came back, we had running water in the house and we had electricity. Because of this system of lakes here, the water system in the wells in Grand Lake were contaminated. And so they put a copper line all the way around to here. I guess it one went down a little bit further. So we had running water. And that was nice. So then I began the rebuilding of this place. First, Marjorie wasn't a mountaineer. She liked to hear the water running in the house, you know. She didn't like what Mother used to call the golden stairs. She didn't like that. So I converted the dining room into a bathroom. Brought up a stove, both it was a small, and I think it was both propane and wood. Threw out the old stove, took it out, an old Mary Ann, dumped it in the lake. Put a water heater in the kitchen. I found a couple of fellows over in the drugstore one time who I could get to help me, and we put in a septic tank, which is still there. It's just buried. Just this side of the old Bruin cottage in a fairly level place. And so we had running water, we had hot water, we had a bathroom. We didn't change things very much. But as I acquired a little bit more financing, said we were going to have to make major revisions. Now, there's a lot of history about that, too. Mildred Keister died. Opal, who married Everett McKee, had one child. What was her name? Marilyn Key, that doesn't sound right. Anyway, she was a nice little girl. Anyway, when I was in the Navy, I was in Pacific on a destroyer, and my brother Paul was in England. He was in the Air Force. Mr. Keister had carcinoma of the stomach. Now remember, we talked about we owned half their house and they owned half of ours. Well, my father's, when my father died in 1920, you know now what time it is, don't you? But this part of the property never went through probate. We have no idea why, because Harry's not here, and my guardian at that time for financial purposes was J.G. Alden. And Mr. Keister, we knew he was going to die. So we had to separate the property. So we sent, Paul and I said, quick claim deeds back and forth over half the world. And they did too. So finally we got the property separated. And it was all duly recorded in Hutsover Springs. And that would have been in, during the war, early 40s. And to make it easier, I put it all in my name. So that's the way I did Paul out of his share of the county too. His fair share, I should say. Well, Paul died in about the mid-50s, I think. And it was time to acquire the rest of the cottage. Because Mrs. Keister had died, and Mr. Keister had left that property to the grandchildren. Carl didn't have any children. Mildred had a daughter whose name was Anderson. And the only offspring of Opal and Everett McKee was Mildred Ellen. That's the name, Mildred Ellen McKee. And I bought the place from them for $4,500. This particular property, that's the house, everything just as it stood there. And I think they set the price. I didn't have very much money at that time either, so I was very happy about it. Well, I got to think, what is it going to be? This is going to be a major problem, rebuilding that thing. I had a good friend named Ron Hull, so I sold it to him for the same price I paid for it, which was, well, it had its good points. It really did. Because he had some vision and some ambition, and he had enough time to take off to do things. So what he did, he was doing a little construction work at that time, or supervising. And he brought two fellas up here, Don Shepard and Freddie Bowen. And we really made some changes. They raised the house, the top of the house. Instead of those walls being 3 feet high, they now went up to 7 feet. So we now have a full second story, which was a great thing. And then I brought Johnny Lee up here on 2 occasions. And then with the help of, what was his name? The carpenter. We were talking about him last night. Oh, come on.
Anyone from a cook?
No, he's from
George
here.
Nair.
George Nair, he was so honest that it was incredible. He was so honest, and he liked to talk. He would rebuild the brewing house. He and I'd get to talking down on the beach, and he'd take the time out. He wouldn't charge Bruin for the time he spent talking to me. Anyway, he rebuilt the inside of the house. Put in this little closet here. Put in the bathroom upstairs. And then I had Johnny Leake come up with his nephew, or brother-in-law. And I was with him. And we put in all the wood paneling, put in all new windows. We made it really a nice place. And then we took measurements. We took out the wall between the kitchen and the dining room, which became a bathroom. And we took measurements, and then I built at home during the winter all the kitchen cabinets, made it out of ash, stained it with sort of an antique color. And Johnny Lee and I brought them up and put them in, put in the ceiling, and then put in radiant heat in the kitchen, the dining room, and I guess that's all. And we put in an electric stove, oven, range, everything was electric then. But the house was still cold. Now Ron Hull's father was an electrician. So I brought up all the panel heating for the perimeter heating for here and upstairs. And he installed that. Ron built a boathouse. And also, I should mention too that the Freddie Bone and Shepard also built some suspended docks out here, which the residuals of which are still there and are used to support the president. That didn't last. And that's when we got interested in sailing. Well, I was down in, let's see, it was in Florida, St. Petersburg, for Mary Kay's wedding. I drove by this, this little marina, and here was this boat for sale, sailboat for sale. So I bought it. Doc, quiet, kiddo. So I bought it, I think, for $500. Put it in a railroad train. Just sent it up by freight, by railroad car. And it turned out it was called a 505. Well, I didn't know very much about sailing at that time. And I didn't know that it was an Olympic class boat, you see. And that's on that boat I learned to sail. And I spent the first summer half of the time in the water, because it's a high performance boat, weighed about 200 pounds, had I don't know how many feet of sail, but had a jib and mainsail. It was a hot boat. They let me race with it, because they said it won't count. So this is when I started racing. There, okay. This is the evening of the same day that we started the soliloquy, and we'll try to wind it up in about 30 minutes. Steve has a lot of things that he'd like to have me talk about, but some of them are not relative to Grand Lake, and since this is focusing on this particular place, let's keep it at that. We had sold the east side of the cottage to Ron Hull family, and together we had acquired the 505, and we had raised the second floor till it was a full-sized area. At that time, as conceived, we had the large bedroom on the east, a fairly large bedroom on the north, which contained two single beds, a small bed on the south, which originally I made into two bunk beds. The superior one was suspended on one corner by a piece of nylon rope that was blocked up in the ceiling. This worked for when the children were small, and it soon proved unsatisfactory as they began to grow. And during these few years, I think prior to that, a good friend of mine, Dr. Vincent Cedarblade, a surgeon in Denver, was sold on my idea to build a cottage to the east of us, and this was constructed by George Nair. Put up a nice boathouse. And I arranged for him to buy a crisscross from Glenn Sliger, who had an agency for one of these, and McCook. The interesting thing about that is that the demonstrator was the only one he required, and I was able to get him a real fine boat for about $2,500. A friend of his also built to the west of us. This was Ralph Stuck. He was a neurosurgeon in Denver. Really quite a political fellow. Did a lot of good for Denver, particularly in the form of contagious diseases. And he was an active fellow up here, too. A real dedicated fellow. Not a sailor. He had a boat that was quite big, had about a 45 horsepower motor on it. And one thing about him, he always wore his life jacket. I tried to teach him to sail with him with the 505, but I turned over too often for him to be interested in that. Interestingly, we had several nice trips with the Cedarblades, with the children and with the Hull children. And this area, this time up here was great for children because we all played together, and we hiked together and fished together, and it was a great thing for their formative years. Let's see now, where do we go from here? Turn off the thing. Anyway, then I got into sailing, and after I became interested in this, I didn't fish much anymore. It was evident that the 505 would not be adaptable to this area, so I took it home. We used it there for a while, and Marjorie didn't like it. She just didn't like to have me sail. I never really understood why. But finally I gave in, and I traded it to Jack Stevens as a down payment on a mink stove. And that made everybody happy. But a friend of mine, K.O. Loudon, had an M20 scow. Now these are the class of boats that sails here at Grand Lake. And so I agreed to buy it. This was when I was at the school board, on the school board, and on my way to a meeting in Omaha, I stopped by Lexington Heating for it. But I didn't tell Marjorie anything about it. So At the dance club one night, on Saturday, Clyde Clark, who heard rumors of this, came over to Margie and said, Margie, I hear your husband bought a sailboat. Her remark was, over my dead body. But I acquired it with the trailer. I think I paid $1,200 for it. And oh no, I had to have a trailer made for it. It was number 91. Now that's an old sailboat. From the number 91 boat that Mel was built. And I learned to sail it. This was much nicer. Brought it up here, and I used to bring Barney McGrath up as crew. The boys were too small.
No, I was gone by then.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Paul was too small, and Steve, you know, he was kind of refractory to sailing. One time we were out sailing with him, and Bob Felton was with me. Steve got bored, jumped overboard, swam to shore, and I think that was the last time he was in the sailboat for many years. Anyway, I took the boat back and forth, and one time in Cook I took Warren Farrell out sailing, and he said, I'd like to buy that. I said, it's sold. And I think I got $1,200 for it, which is what I paid for it. In the meantime, I'd had a few accidents, and the mast was broken. The original mast was Sitka spruce, and that was replaced by a mast made in England. It was an aluminum mast. In fact, that boat is still operational, and probably now is en route to Iowa. It was owned by Matt Farrell. Well, anyway, I immediately purchased a new boat, number 408, and that was a good boat. Complete with a Murphy spinnaker, new sail, and everything. And with that, we sailed around the Cook, brought it up here, and with what's his name?
Jigs?
Jigs, McCormick? No.
Bone. Morrison.
Jigs Morrison, who was an experienced M20 sailor. We won the Lipton Cup. No, the Hanley Cup, and this was in 1976. One of the greatest events of my life. I think Steve enjoyed it too. But after that, we didn't do so well. And Marjorie kept after me to get rid of the boat, and I finally sold it to Lance Sherwood, whose family had acquired the Sherwood place. The Ralph Stuck place, just up west of here. So there I was without a boat, without a sailboat. I had a Sunfish originally, but I sold that too. And then one time, Steve began to feel that, or I got the impression that Steve would like to sail, so I got another one. That was number 464. But my expectations of Steve becoming a competitive sailor never materialized. He wanted to fish. And, so I used that for several years, and finally took it back to the Cook and sold it to Pat Farrell. Our grandchildren, or my grandchildren, didn't seem to want to sail it. They went to sailing school, sailed lasers, and by incidentally I bought a laser too, which we still have. And that sort of ended my sailing here on Grand Lake, because by that time I was too old to do it any longer. I might mention that in the early 80s I got perhaps a little reckless, and I bought an ocean-going yacht. And it took some money that I invested in a mutual fund. It hadn't made any money all year, so I said, to hell with it. took the money and bought Sorrento, which we had great times. But it certainly became feasible that, evident that I couldn't keep a boat in the Mediterranean and use it just maybe a month out of the year. So I sold it and depreciated it out, and I think I came out about even on it. And that ended my sailing experience. And now the place is as it was originally conceived, and nothing particularly new has been added now for some time, except a bunch of decorations inside. Batty's done a magnificent job. There are numerous things, too numerous to count. One of the things that's evident around here in back of me is a bunch of fishing paraphernalia, some of which I may have used. I don't know, this looks like an old Creole here, a bunch of old hats above me. We have a nice music center behind. By the way, that was an old radio that Ray Klingner gave me that I eviscerated, rebuilt, and it was nice. I had a change in, and we have lots of records. And of course, the evolution in electronics continues, so we re-eviscerated it, and now we have all this sound equipment on top with Bose speakers, so really it's pretty nice. The dock that I had built, or rather Steve and his friends built, which was quite adequate for us. It had a sling for or a cradle for the sailboat, and places for the dinghy. Eventually was taken out by the ice one spring. Unfortunately, I had insurance, and because there was a light on a post out there, and that light came from the house, I got $10,000 to build a new dock, and it almost took care of it. And that's the dock we have today. I was seduced a few years ago. The boys were growing up and their grandchildren, and so I bought a motorboat, inboard, outboard, which was a catastrophic thing. And it fulfills all the criteria for my attitude towards motorboats. But today, it worked very well. Took the Bonita, Batty, Steve and me. It took us around the lake and we saw all the new stuff. There's a new generation up here. I feel I don't know how many more times I can come up here. I'm not acclimated to the area anymore because impaired cardiac output when I'm here. But I managed to make up for a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. The Bonita is coming with me now. And I think she likes it up here too. Probably a little bit better than she used to like. That's just part. but she's over here laughing, and I think that's true. The place looks nice. When we refinished this, I bought all new oak furniture, some of which you can see here. This chair is one of them. The chair that I sat in on the first of this session is the hickory furniture, which we still have. So this furniture that we're having, we use that on the porch now, is at least 80, 85 years old. Still serviceable, still just as good as the day it was built. There, or certainly when it was acquired. But I am getting older. I'm going to turn 81 this year. I don't know how many.
82.
No, 81. 81
81.
this year. And I don't know how many more times I'm going to be able to come, but I'll come as long as I'm able. And I have Steve here to help me when I get here. Probably Annabelle will be coming too. I should mention, we went to the Commodore's Ball last night. Todd and Eric Stahl won the Hannah Cup. By the way, they only acquired 3.5 points, which is better than I did. I think when I won it, I had 6 points. And it was confirmed that I won it on the last race. They didn't have to race the last day. And it was fun. It was nice to see them get the cup. But one of the interesting things to see was Annabelle dancing. It was wonderful. She wouldn't dance with me, so Steve and Tony Rodriguez danced with her, and they drew a crowd. But this is going to conclude my dissertation on the Grand Lake. It's been one of the guiding things of my life. It's something that it was a great experience, and I think of who was responsible for it. My father and Mr. Keisher, who had the foresight to acquire the land, build the cottage. My great regret is that my parents did not live to see it develop, but they were certainly replaced by Harry Stewart, his wife Edna, who acted as my parents, prepared me for this. It's been a great period, and now it's going to be into the 4th generation, maybe even the 5th, going, and that my grandfather, Charles Stewart, was instrumental in the construction of it. It's still in good shape. We've had to level it a few times, put in a new hearth, but it looks nice. The panel's in good shape. The beams are still there. The roof still does leak. And it's going to be stable, and I hope it's going to continue. Oh, and there are a few more things that came to my mind. One is what happened to the Hull side of the cottage. Ron was ambitious. He acquired a place across the lake near the Alva Adams Tunnel, and his portion has changed hands probably 4 or 5 times, and it needs to be purchased again. It needs quite a bit of work, and then this can be really a very good unit here as this duplex exists today, and I hope that this be purchased. The present asking price, believe it or not, is $195,000. Quite a differential from the $4,500 that was necessary to acquire it. Of course, I don't have any idea how much we spent to improve it. This is all past, but significantly taxes have risen from about $40 a year to around $1,200, if this tells you anything. 9 o'clock, Lindell invites me. One little bit more. The Cedar Blade house was purchased gone through 2 hands now. It is owned by Dr. Alan Harrington, the orthopedic surgeon from Pueblo. The Bullocks, who I forgot to mention, acquired the Bruin house, completely rebuilt it, and particularly the beautiful fireplace. George Nair doing most of the work. He had problems, And then it changed hands several times, but now it's in possession of a family with the name of what?
Brooks.
Brooks, yes. And I think it's in good hands, and it will continue. We have a real nice community over here. We just need to get us somebody of comparable character on the other side. The Stuck House was acquired after Ralph died. He had carcinoma of the bile ducts. It was sold to Don and Connie Sherwood of Denver. He was a lawyer, a native of Nebraska. He had 4 little children at the time. Now, the third one is being married this Saturday. They're fine people. It's a good community here, and I hope it continues that way. Good night.
It's about 6:30 on a Thursday morning. All's quiet except for some crows overhead, a lone goose, a fisherman's boat coming this way. I thought I'd try to describe the beauty, but it's difficult to put it in words. It's easier just to photograph it like I'm doing. We're looking west at the Never Summer Range and Rabbit Ears towards town. You can see the reflection of the clouds in the still waters. Occasionally a fish will jump or rise. The serenity, the peacefulness is just enough to make you stop and take a breath. Just enjoy it with me. Sun's trying to come up. Starting to look off to the north now. Look at the clouds. The sun. Reflecting off them in the water. It makes it come alive. You can see the blue in the background up the North Inlet. It's like the world is just awakening. And it's such a great thing to be part of it. Reflection of the trees and the mountains and the lake. If you listen closely, you hear the squirrels in the background chattering. This is the best time in the morning to me. I can't think of a more enjoyable way to spend it as to get up in the morning when there's so few people up. Listen to the chipmunks and squirrels. Watch the beauty of the sunrise. look off to the east and see Baldy. Maybe a few clouds behind it. The sky was pink earlier when I didn't have the camera. And just look off, look at the beauty. There's no place else in the world that I would rather spend my summers than right here. The memories are so good. Makes me think when I was a youth and I used to get up first thing in the morning and grab my fishing rod and go down and take a few salmon eggs and test the water to see if there was a fish. Slip a hook in one and pull them up. And by the time everyone else got up, I'd have my mess of fish. Looking off to the Baldy and the cottages to the east. Occasionally see a fish rise. A couple sitting on the dock down at Harrington's. A Presbyterian minister and his wife from Pueblo. Also enjoying the beauty of the morning, along with the fishermen in the boat that have passed. Where in the world do you have anything as beautiful and as serene as this? Only here. But I think one of the things that helps you enjoy it is a little higher level of maturity. I know I didn't see it this way as a youth. I know my children, as youth, don't see it. They're about 18 and 21 now. But I hope as they grow into adults, they too will get up in the morning and spend time thinking of how lucky and fortunate we are to be able to spend our time here and pass the legacy on to their children. This is the beginning of the day, but actually it's the end of the tape. And I thank my father for making the tape for us and for future generations. Goodbye for now.